So here we have our level design template. I'll quickly go through each section and then we'll look at a finished example. At the very top, we have the game and level name. Since we're only working on one level in this course, this stays simple. But in a full game, the game's name goes here and the specific level name goes right below it. Next is the story section. This is where you add any background or context for your world, what's happening and why. Then we have the location. This explains where the level takes place and what's going on in that space. I usually include both the visual style of the environment and how the player moves through it. If you have maps or concept art, you can place them here as well. After that is the mission objective. This is where you clearly define what the player needs to do in the level. Then we list the gameplay mechanics used in the level, things like running, jumping, shooting, exploring, or interacting with NPCs. And finally, we have special mechanics. This section covers anything outside the game's default mechanics. For example, if your level includes something unusual like a door locked with a keypad, that becomes a special mechanic. The player interacting with that keypad and entering the correct code would be listed here. Next is playable characters. This is straightforward, who the player controls in the game. If you have concept art for the character, you can add it here as well. Then we have enemies. Here you list all enemy types the player will face. You can also include artwork, stats, or extra details if you have them. After that are non-playable characters or NPCs. These are friendly AI characters the player can interact with, like quest givers or background characters that populate the world. Next is victory and failure conditions. This explains how the player completes the level and how they lose it. This section is very important, especially during playtesting, because many people forget to properly test failure conditions as well as victory ones. Your game needs to correctly handle both. And finally, we have the mission walkthrough. So here we simply create a numbered list that breaks down every step of the level in order, from the moment the player starts all the way to the end. Each step is listed sequentially with a short description. We can also label actions like puzzle, navigation, or combat to make it clearer. There are some examples shown here, but it becomes much easier to understand when we look at the actual design document I've put together for this course. So let's go through that. Alright, so I may not be a narrative designer or a marketing expert, so excuse the simple naming here. Based on our earlier discussion about inspirations and the type of level we're building, I've created this concept. The game is called Simon's Banana Bash. Think of a bright, cartoon-style 3D platformer similar to Nintendo-inspired games. The level is called Tutorial Temple. The idea is that this is one of the first levels in a larger game, so the difficulty is intentionally low because the focus is on teaching the player the core mechanics. In the story section, I've also included inspiration from similar games, so anyone reading the document understands the overall style and direction. Now for the location and setting. It takes place in an ancient jungle temple filled with light traps and simple challenges designed to keep out anyone who isn't prepared. The difficulty remains easy, even though the environment feels adventurous. Here I've also added a quick top-down map. This gives a full overview of the level we'll be building throughout the course. The player is a small cartoon monkey character, designed to be cute and simple. The level is split into 5 rooms, and we'll go into each of them in more detail later in the mission walkthrough section. For now, this map and layout give a clear overall structure of the level. We also included a legend, so it's clear what each icon and trap represents on the map. The mission objective is simple: survive all traps and hazards while moving through the temple, collecting bananas along the way until the end of the level. The core gameplay mechanics are just running and jumping. For special mechanics, I've added an interact action. The idea is that in the final room, there's a treasure chest or object the player must interact with to complete the level. The playable character is Simon the Simian. That's the name of our small monkey protagonist. Now, the template includes a section for enemies, but in this level we don't really have enemies. So instead, I've changed this section to obstacles, which fits much better. These obstacles include bottomless pits, falling rocks, fire traps, and a timed button door. I'll go into more detail on each of these when we break the rooms down later. There are no NPCs in this level. For victory conditions, the player must reach the final room and open the treasure chest. For failure conditions, the player can lose either by falling into a pit or by running out of health. If we look back at the map, the hatch marks represent bottomless pits, so one way to fail is simply falling into those gaps. Because of that, we also need a basic health system. This is to handle damage that doesn't instantly kill the player, like hazards that hurt them in room 3 without knocking them into a pit right away. We also have falling blocks and bursts of fire placed along narrow pathways here. These traps can damage the player, but they won't always knock them into a pit, so we need to account for that with a proper health and damage system. Now let's break down the rooms. I've included zoomed-in versions of each one, along with a mission walkthrough description for clarity. Room 1 is labeled Navigation. This is the starting area where the player spawns. There are no obstacles here, it simply sets the tone and introduces the level. The player just moves straight forward into Room 2. Room 2 focuses on basic platforming. It contains a simple gap in the floor that the player must jump across to reach the next door. This is designed as a tutorial section to introduce jumping mechanics. Room 3 is more complex and is labeled Difficult Navigation. The player enters from the west side and follows a narrow path across a large bottomless pit. Along the north section, there are falling blocks that drop onto the path. These are slightly delayed so the player can react and pass through safely. On the east side, the challenge continues with fire traps that shoot from the walls. There is also a small safe zone where the player can pause before continuing. After this, the player moves into Room 4. Room 4 introduces another bottomless pit, but this time it includes scattered platforms that must be jumped across. The added challenge here is a timed gate. The player steps on a floor button which opens the gate and starts a countdown. They must cross the platforms and pass through before the timer runs out. Finally, Room 5 contains no hazards or enemies. It simply holds the treasure chest. The player enters, collects the bananas, opens the chest, and completes the level.